So this morning, I'm pretty excited. Hey, I'm going to grab it. Should have brought it with me. I'm excited this morning to be with you. I've got I know that you've been begun a series, and that series is about kind of what it means to be a member. And so, like, how do you take part in a community in a way that is valuable, purposed, kind of gets into your skin and shapes, changes, confirms, and even puts a little energy toward your identity as a Jesus follower. And that should be the way that this all works out. And this morning, we're focused on presence, our presence. What does that mean? And so most of my childhood, I thought presents were exactly what you're thinking right now. But I was like, yeah, we get to give our presents. That's amazing. Oh, that's really sweet. Somebody's taking care of me, and appreciate that so much. Oh, look, here's some other presents. That's really fun. Oh, look. It's good. I like that. Kitty's telling me how I can raise it up a little bit because Reese is so sweet and short, but that's okay. Was that my outside voice? I'm so sorry. But y'all can tell I've known him a while, can't you? Yeah, so I do love him very much. So grateful for all his leadership and friendship. So this morning, we are talking about, kind of what it means to take part in that. But I think we're going to take a little bit of a journey on that because I think there's some really powerful things that we can do to understand the Bible, the scriptural take, even what Jesus has to say, and let it kind of infuse us a little bit with what it might mean to be a part of a Christ-centered community. So if you don't mind, if you would stand as you are able, I'm going to read you just a quick scripture, and then we'll go from there. It comes from Mark chapter 5. Begins at verse 21. These are the words of the Lord. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, his name was Jairus, came. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she'll be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. I have to say, by the way, this story is in 2 of the Gospels. It's in Mark, and it's also in Luke. And in Luke, does anybody know what Luke did for a living? Yeah, do you know what part of this story is left out? And it's this part right here when it says, she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors. Somehow he left that part out. I think that's fascinating and kind of hilarious. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt it from her body that she was freed from her suffering. Love that. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered. "And you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." These are the words of the Lord. Have a seat. Thank y'all so much. Love this. There's so much in this story. I literally would love to be here for a long time, but I know that we're going to not do that. But But I do want to give us a little opportunity to kind of engage this in a different kind of way. So I'm going to ask you to do something that's not necessarily strange, but it could be a little bit different. And that is, what I want you to do is think right now, just for a minute, about what you think is the most difficult kind of issue in the world right now. Kind of, what's the most difficult issue in the world? Just whatever comes to your mind, all right? Could be something that everybody would say, It could be something that's just yours. Now, that's what I want you to do. I want you to talk to each other. Just share a minute, like what you think it is. Now, be warned. Normally in our culture and world, we're competing at this. No, it's not. That's not the, like we have this weird, like, what's the headline thing? No. All we want to do is hear each other right now and say, Like, what do you think is the most pressing issue in the world right now? So we're just going to take one little minute to talk to the people that you maybe came with. If you see somebody that's kind of off by themselves, just kind of rope them in and just do that stuff, okay? So let's just share real quick. What do you think is the most, there you go. What's the, just real fast, what do you think is the most pressing issue in the world right now? About 30 seconds. Make sure everybody gets a shot. Ten seconds for the fast round. Stay in your groups. We got one more. Here's what we're going to do. I know, everybody flees. It's fine. I do that too. Here's the thing. Now what I want you to do is say, okay, so that's the issue that's maybe on your mind or maybe on their mind. Great. If you were king or queen of the world, what would you do? Okay, what would you do? And I hope somebody said Israel, Gaza, and I hope somebody's taking down notes. So let's move on. That's full measure, that's mine. So go ahead and just talk about it. If you're a king or queen of the world, you might not have an answer, but how would you start? Okay, does that make sense? All right, so how would you start? You're king or queen of the world. So do something that helps, fixes, whatever you think. Couple minutes. About 30 seconds. You have 30 seconds to fix the world. Go. Yeah, right now. Yeah, so you're doing great. Yeah. Ten seconds of the world's coming apart. Awesome, so good. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt, especially because I figure those are probably pretty complex issues, and you had some thoughtful answers you're trying to work out, like we all do, right? Constantly, every day, all the time. It's pretty busy. So I just want to hear just a couple. So on the first front end, what would you guys decide for y'all right now? What's the most important or pressing issue on the world right now? The war? Yeah, war, peace, just the whole conflict. In the world in general, or is there a specific conflict that's on your mind? Israel, Gaza, or is it Ukraine, or it's a lot, right? Okay, it's just the world on fire. Yeah, just everything that comes with it. Sure. Yeah. Sorry? The world on fire. Oh, yes. Now that's in my head. Thanks for that. So what else? What other issues are going on?
Be so ingrained and having that effect of kind of detachment from relationships and maybe just reality in general and that continues.
Yeah, it's even worse because you're still right, that disconnection. I usually put on you've ever dread scrolling? Yeah. You're literally just watching those little videos, just dread scrolling. Doom scrolling, that's another one, yeah. Yeah, when I figured out that I had stood in the same place in my house for 15 minutes, doom scrolling after I'd locked the doors and everybody was asleep, I think it's not just the youth. It's me. Yeah, I'm having my own.
Really coming up with
Totally, and natives to it, right? Because they don't know. At least I knew a time that didn't exist, right? So sure. What else? Maybe one more, just for fun. Or are those the ones that are on our minds? Poverty. Yeah. Man, just the depth of everything that comes from the suffering, the anxiety, everything that comes with poverty is really such a determinant in so many ways, right? It's brutal. Beautiful. That's good. Anybody solve it? Any of these have yeah? I just thought, why not? You never know. So I'd put it out there. It's hard though, right? And probably you all, and I would hope to have some kind of good idea about what we would do about some of these difficult things, right? But I would almost guarantee you, and it was true for me, I would almost guarantee you that you would and I would completely disagree with how God would do that. And I want to show you why. So here's this woman. Now, the way that this works is that this actual scripture in Mark 5 is a beautiful piece of the Bible, and it's important to actually know that this is the way this works often in Mark. What Mark will often do as a part of his writing in the literature is open up one story, insert a second story, and then finish the first story. He does it over and over and over again. And the brilliance of what I always thought in Mark was just this gospel that's built like this. Here's the action. There's not even a birth narrative. It's bang, 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 bang. Is that Mark is like a poet. Brilliant. Because these stories not only open, insert, and then close, but they're woven. Now, if I could spend a long time with you, I could show you all the different ways these are woven, but we're not going to do that today. I'm telling myself that. What I do want to say is that for the Bible nerds in here, go look at that if you've never seen it, because even the entire Gospel of Mark is one of those. Now, there's a fancy theological seminary term for this. I don't remember it, so I call it an Oreo. It opens with the cookie, here comes and then, does that make sense? So go look at Mark, the Oreo Gospel. You're welcome for ruining all of Mark. But that's true. So here's this picture, right? It opens with Jesus is doing all of the amazing things. He's teaching. There are miracles. There's this stuff kind of falling from the sky. People have a sense that the world is changing, at least in this crackling early piece where these conversations are beginning to happen, and people are saying, could this be? Probably not. Gosh, I hope it is, but I don't want to put my energy into something that breaks my heart again, gosh dang, and you can feel all of that kind of flowing around in the communities as Jesus moves around, and the disciples are trying to figure it out too. He lands on a side of the Galilee. And once again, people come, and this time it's Jairus. It's a Roman. He's desperate, right? And he shows up, and he says, essentially, I'm going to fall. And, by the way, don't know for sure if he's a Roman, but he's definitely one of the synagogue leaders. He falls at Jesus' feet, right? Falls at his feet. Now, anybody that has been in leadership before, especially in social leadership where you have a position, to throw yourself at a man's feet that you're not really sure might be, hasn't been raised from the dead. This is just a man that is in this crackling opening of the kingdom that people are hoping could be. This guy, though, he throws himself at his feet. Why? Because he's desperate. Right? Your little girl's dying. Everything's out the window. All those war, meaningless. Poverty, I don't care. Everything goes because you're blinded by what's right in front of you, what's yours. Here comes this woman. So great, by the way. He says to Jairus, he says, sure, let's go. I'll heal her. Lay her hands, I'm in. And the disciples are awesome and also scary. This keeps happening, right? So they're going through, and it says the crowd starts to press around him. And then this woman, and we get her story. She's been bleeding an issue of blood, it says, for 12 years. The pain and the struggle of this would have been overwhelming. This is just me imagining, knowing very little bit. My wife has had 4 children, so I've been intimately connected to all kinds of pain in this way for a long time, and yet I am totally disconnected from this and have no idea what I'm talking about. Right? Like, I love the guys that said, we're pregnant. No, you're not. I also love my favorite line my wife ever said about babies is she said, I used to think that you delivered a baby. Now I think you're delivered from one. That was usually when she was 9 months. Yeah, she was ready to go. But there's this hilarious but also intense reality of what's going on, right? So she's struggling. It says for 12 years. And she's done everything that she can. She's suffered and paid out and she's desperate too, right? So what does she do? Well, desperation. Just like Jairus, all of a sudden now she's desperate. And what is she? She's blinded to the world that is around her. I had a headache this last week. And you might be thinking to yourself, gosh, we're talking about the death of a daughter and 12 years of bleeding, and you had a headache this week? All right, so there's where my life is right now. It's not bad. It's really not bad. Because the thing, though, with my headache was, it was one of those really bad. Does anybody in here get really bad headaches, like migraines or anything? Okay. So I don't get them but maybe once or twice a year or every 2. So I'm very lucky. But I do face them every once in a while. And so I had one this last week. It was so blinding. Like I couldn't move around without it hurting a little bit more, but I felt like I needed to move because it hurt so bad. That was the wiggle, the wrestling that I was doing. And I couldn't think of anything. It was the only thing that was on my mind. So the first thing I want to say is when we talk about all of these massive issues that are in front of us, if you are dealing with an issue that is blinding, if you have a child that is sick, if you are sick, if you are struggling and the rest of the world seems to not care, and everything is just creating a desperation in you that seems to well up, like I am panicked and don't know what to do, and nobody seems to be paying attention because everybody wants to write, and in every tiny little minutia of any kind of whispered sentence around serious issues, but it would be really good if one time somebody cared about me. It'd be really nice if just once somebody paid attention to the struggle that I was in. What I want to tell you is some really good news. But it's also a little intimidating. And that's this. Right now, the reason that you're here is to hear these words. Jesus sees you. It's a whole point. I mean, the Romans were crucifying people all the time. The pressure and the death and the struggle was so overwhelming. But does Jesus take a political appointment? Does he grab power and figure out the security structure? Nope. Does he figure out where the resources should go so that people could live in an increasingly healthy environment? No. It's hand-to-hand combat, heart to heart, like right here, like right now. Amongst it all, Jesus says, no, you. Your personal struggle, your personal pain is what is most important to me. When the world doesn't seem to see you for a second, he sees you and is deeply interested in not just your healing from whatever it is that is just bearing down, but something even more. Healing all of you. So my encouragement just right away is to say, I'm overwhelmed with Jesus all the time. But the idea that the whole world is just flying around and seems to be on fire now is not that different than it was then, and yet this is where I start getting challenged by God when I start thinking about all the ways that I would solve the problems that all this kind of stuff. What does God do? He walks into the earth and goes heart to heart. That's his move. And I have to be honest. If I'm really honest, I'm like, that's your move? Like, really, really? That's going to be the thing you do? Is when the whole world is falling apart, you're going to step in and be much more interested in this right here than you are in taking over a country and ruling it. I have to figure out how to get my mind around that. I don't know that I entirely have. But what I love about it so much is I know that one transformed human being can transform a family, can transform a community, can transform a city. You get one person who has been deeply and completely restored, and the world is going to change. You feel that? You know that? You see it? Maybe even you want to have that. She has that edge. She's on the edge of the crowd. They're pushing in. You know, if she has an issue of blood, do you know that that means not only can they not touch her, they can't even be around her? Did you know that they can't use the furniture that she used? For me, I don't fully understand the issue that she has. The issue that's on the front, I don't. I don't know that any of us will. Maybe when we meet her someday, we can ask her. There'll be a line. Maybe we can do that. But I do understand another thing. I think that the thing that is even worse about her issue of blood is complete aloneness. Not loneliness. There is, by the way, a sacred loneliness, just as an aside. There's a sacred loneliness that I think we all feel for a deep sense of home, of feeling completely whole. People call it heaven or kingdom. I don't think we ever escape that sort of loneliness for when we don't have these barriers in between us anymore. We know each other fully, completely healed. That's going to be amazing. Feels like we grab little moments of it here and there, but like we're always going to have that loneliness. What I'm talking about is worse. It is aloneness. You know that aloneness like this has an effect on your body, smoking 15 cigarettes a day? CDC. If a person is alone, if they're separated, if they're isolated, it's physically affecting their body like you're smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's wild, don't you think? And, weirder than that, over the last several years, we all started smoking. Right? We all went into our houses and we're alone. It's weird. It's like we picked up a bad habit. And for a lot of us, we haven't really come back out. We still haven't broken the habit. I think some of us, at least for me, it was a little hard because of all the things that kind of went with it, and now I'm kind of getting back into it. I'm an extrovert, so get ready, right? I'm coming. But for those of us that are introverts, we're like, best years ever. You know? But it's true. It has a deep impact. She has that impact. She's desperate for physical. She's desperate for aloneness. She's desperate for everything. And so I think it's powerful to think about what Jesus actually does here. When he does this thing, by the way, there's 12 and 12. I have to say this. The Bible nerd in me is freaking out. So how many years was she bleeding? Do you remember? 12. Do you remember how old the little girl is? Yeah. Just the whole thing. So what I think in here, it connects not only the faithful, but it also says what? You resurrect a little girl, what do you think is happening to this woman? She's being resurrected too. I love that. There's lots more, right? But that's just some. All right, I'll keep moving. But it's that unclean nature and everything that comes with it. And so she reaches for it. So for the longest time, have you ever heard she grabbed the hem of his garment? That's like the most traditional way of saying that. Yeah. And so I've always thought of this woman as kind of somebody that I pity a little bit for a lot of reasons, right? And pity's a terrible word. I know that. But that's really, if I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, poor thing. That like comes up in my mind, in my heart a little bit. And that she kind of grovels forward and grabs the hem of his garment. And that's this thing that Jesus recognizes. And that's probably why he also didn't recognize she was there. That's not actually probably contextually true. I do want to change your mind about her a little bit because there's something really powerful. In the context of that time, in that first century, these phrases you have a different kind of meaning. In fact, what I love about this is that there was a knowledge that the Messiah would have what's called healing in his wings. It comes from scripture, I believe, in Isaiah. And so what that meant was in the prayer shawl that they had, there were a talit, there's a talit, which is the prayer shawl, and the tzitzit, which are all fun to say, that are on the corners of that prayer shawl. Every little thing has this powerful meaning, right? So they would have longer tzitzit on the edges of their prayer shawl if there were considered, I mean, it's all this kind of ridiculous stuff. I know it's hilarious, but here's the thing. What that meant was, if he had healing in his wings, then what would happen is that people would come and say, well, I want some of that healing. And they would grab the tzitzit on the end of their prayer shawl, the edge of the garment. Really, it's the tzitzit on the edge of the talit, but you can see why they would just say edge of the garment, right? So that's this picture. What that means is it completely changes the heart of this woman from being, she's desperate, right? Yeah, she's in pain, yes? She is alone, yes? But please don't mistake her for being small or groveling. What she does is pushes through the crowd and grabs the hem of his garment and says, I believe he's the Messiah and there's healing in his wings. She makes a statement of faith. That's what happens in that moment. So for me and that woman, I'm like, oh yeah, now I really am going to stand in line to talk to her. I just want to know her. Like, what a powerful thing. Jesus is hilarious. What happens next? And he stops because he knows, by the way, you notice this little point, that he knows that power went out from him. Does that mean he didn't give it away? Does that mean he didn't turn around and go, I bless you, woman that is 12 years of bleeding and is lonely and miserable? No, no, no. There's just something naturally happening in Jesus' presence. He knows what happened, but he didn't right? I think that's really beautiful and cool. It's just like all kind of flowing. Jesus is like in the room. So this happens. What's great is I always love the disciples. They're some of my favorite, right? This crowd's crushing all around him. He's like, they're the guys that are trying to help him get through. And if you've ever tried to help somebody get through a crowd, it's quite something. Like people just don't seem to be paying attention at all. And so they're kind of pushing, but trying not to be ugly. And you're like moving through, and they're pressing in on him. And then he stops, and this crowd that's crushing around him is like, who touched me? And I swear the disciples are like, is he kidding us right now? Like who didn't touch him? Like they're all around us. Like what are you, and I love the way that they leave that in the Gospels to make sure that we know how human this whole thing is. The disciples are like, what are you even talking about? But he holds and he's scanning. Where did that come from? Where did that go? You ever want to be in a moment in time? I mean, there are a lot of them, right? But I love the idea of being in a moment in time when his eyes lock on hers. Oh, man. What does he see? Can you imagine the love? Just like, can you imagine her? Fear, what's happening? But why does he do this? She's already healed. I mean, for me, the Bible is a wonderful book of answers some of the time. But most of the time, it's a wonderful book of questions. And so there's this moment where it's like, why does he need to talk to her? He didn't do anything. She's healed. We're good. What's the point? She comes to him. It says she tells him everything. Bro, would you tell him everything? Right? You're like, mostly. I would tell him mostly things, That's what it would said if it was me. And he came and he told Jesus most of the stuff, And then he blesses her and says, your faith has healed you. Love that. That's so cool. But why does he do it? Because it's not about her issue of blood. It's about her aloneness. How's that community going to know she's healed? How is she going to be restored to community, to her people? Practically, how does that happen? I'll tell you. You get a really big crowd. You get them all hopped up. You get them right along the area where it's in the dead center of all the activity and everything, where everybody's paying attention because the synagogue leader's daughter needs, and that's good too, but while everybody's paying attention, it's about her. And he says, your faith has healed you. You are restored. So what does he do? He heals all of her. He gives her her community back. Can you imagine what it must have been like for the first person, maybe a friend who hadn't touched her in 12 years, to lay her hand on her shoulder, to give her an embrace? Can you just imagine? Me neither. It's crazy and beautiful. And that's the work of presence. That's what it means to give your presence. Is to be the hand on the shoulder and the hug. To be a part of the work of the kingdom. It also means sometimes that you are the woman with the issue of blood. That you are the father of a dying child. And you give your presence, even in the midst of your pain, to the community so that they can be present for you. That's crazy math. That's the kingdom. That's God's answer to the world's biggest problems. Is the church. Is self-sacrificing relationship that pushes past vulnerability and boundaries and says, I'm not entirely surely how, but somehow you're mine and I'm yours. And we better figure this out on this side of heaven because I feel like we're going to have a lot of answers if we have problems when we get there. It's a powerful thing. Presence. What she didn't have restores her. Last thing I'll tell you. So, Bill Hybels, who, for a lot of reasons, is less thought of these days than he was when I heard this story, but is still got some amazing stuff out there. He told this story. So he was in an airport traveling. And while he was traveling, there was a couple of kids that clearly were brothers and were traveling without parents. And the reason that they knew that is because he could hear them fighting. And it was getting worse and worse, and there was no, adults doing anything. And so he kept kind of looking over, and it was other people, and it was getting uncomfortable, and you're like, oh, what's going on here? And then it seemed to really accelerate and then quiet down. And the way he describes the next piece is very familiar to me for several reasons. He said, do you know the sound of a human fist hitting a human face? Do you know that sound? And it's very distinctive if you've heard it or you've been in a fight. I've lost several. That was a better way to say that. As I was a kid. And so here's this picture. He says he hears that sound, and that sound snaps everybody's attention just immediately. It's just a human thing. And so they look over, and the bigger kid, who was probably 12 or 13, was on top of the smaller kid, who was about 7, and was beating the kid on the ground and grabbing their hair and trying to hit them on the ground. The violence, he said, was overwhelming. I apologize for that. But he said it was crazy. And about the time he rose up and everybody was trying to figure out, one of the staff grabbed him and pulled him off, and then there was another one, and there was this yelling, and everything was calming down, and they were separated, and he was just overwhelmed at this thing, and it was just horrifying. And he was sitting there in an airport trying to wait, and the next thing he knew, he said very quickly they were boarding his airplane, and so now he was on the airplane, and he said he sat down, and as quickly as he could, he tried to find the magazine in the airplane and just sit down and just try to turn the page a minute, right? And as he was trying to flip through and buy whatever was in there, he said he could hear God deep inside of him say, "Don't you dare. Don't you dare turn the page. Don't you dare change your mind. You stay right here." You stay right here in this image. You stay right here in this pain with me. Don't you leave. And he said in the next few minutes, they had a little conversation. God said, what's the trajectory of that kid's life if he's already there? Well, clearly his parents are somewhere else. He's gotten this violent. At some point, then people aren't able to control him in a school, so then he goes to a special school, and then eventually he probably struggles with that. And if he struggles with that, then he might even end up where? Jail. If he ends up jail, then what's he going to get good at? Jail. Right? That's what you get good at in jail a lot. Not everybody. Some people do amazing things, but a lot of times you get really good at jail. And that's what will happen to him. And so the trajectory of his life, if he gets out then, getting good at jail, you can see what's happening. So he starts to think, well, what can intersect this kid's life to change it? What can actually do this? Is it going to be the school systems? My daughter is an educator, like the whole thing. My mother is a teacher. They would be first to stand up here and say, no, the schools, we will do everything that we can to intersect this, but we have boundaries and limitations, and we will be there. They do everything. It's amazing what they do, but they can't solve this problem alone. Right? Can't. What, is it going to be another social program? Is it going to be, you can start to list all these other kinds of things. Heibel said what came to him was a realization that there was only one organization in the entire world that was created to build a family based on love, forgiveness, hope, and constant companionship that would fill voids of family and moral teaching and everything else that could come with it when it was healthy. And he said, and of course, what you already know is that that's the local church. The local church taking a kid on, working with the schools, all the social programming, and becoming that kid's family and facing down the stuff he's going to face down and giving him opportunity after opportunity like he didn't get when he was little and helping him heal through by the grace of God through the Holy Spirit. That was what was real. He realized at that moment that the local church is the hope of the world. And so for me, hearing that, I can't stop crying. Because all I can think of is sometimes we forget. We just forget why we're here, what we're doing. We think, we're just Hope Arise, a little church in the rain that's up above next to a coffee shop we had to close and all this other kind of stuff. And I'm like, no. Don't you dare. Who you are as the church in this place, anywhere you go, is the hope of the world. And all you have to really do is show up. Put your hand on a shoulder. I watched you all do it. I couldn't get you to stop. You're the hope of the world. Don't forget to show up. That's presence. That's you. Me too. Will you pray with me? Eternal God, creator of all things, we would ask now and always that you would bless us with your presence and guidance and love. Help us now as we just reflect, as we move into a time of kind of reflective singing and worship, that you would rise to our hearts and minds the things that you want us to work on or just sit with, or maybe a person that could come to our mind that we just need to reach out to, someone that's alone. Or if we're alone or in pain or blinded by things, Lord, that would you just assure us, whatever it is, Lord, that you have brought to light, would you let us sit with it for a moment and not turn the channel so quick?